And we're live.
Welcome to Threefaced
podcast. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Threefaced episode with Chetan, Anuraj, and myself, Dillon.
Howdy.
Hey.
It's been a while. It's been a long time, but we're back and we're better. And this is
Has it been a while?
Season 2.
It's been. Is this the first episode of season 2?
This is the first episode of season 2. Rebirth.
Wow.
Renewal.
exactly.
Let's go.
So, in reflecting upon all the things that we've done from season 1, we wanted to kind of hit the ground running, hit the ground nice and strong, and talk about things that are relevant to us and things that are relevant to everyone that we think is listening to us in our time. And I thought, what better topic to talk about than the concept of dating and relationships and even marriage? I think that's a good place to start because we're pretty much at the marriageable age right now. I'd probably say
Ladies are single.
This is not a prompt to basically get single people.
So this whole podcast is really just to get our biodatas
Just
out.
like an extended Hinge profile.
Exactly. No, so I thought we could talk about even like talking about marriage and our thoughts on it, and just to get into the flow, I thought I could really kick us off with none other than our favorite cult leader, Osho.
Bhagwan Rajneesh.
Shri Rajneesh.
Sheila's
Daddy.
yes. And he has a very controversial take on marriage, but I thought we could kick this off by talking about it. Marriage is, in its naked reality, a strategy by the society to keep everybody under control. Now, I'll open the floor to you guys, and I'll ask what you guys think of what that takes, and what do you guys think about it?
Look, I understand where he's coming from in some ways, because I get that what he's trying to say is this lifelong binding commitment is not something that is always pure, and Osho's always talking about being pure love or pure expression.
Yep.
And because marriage is not always like that, that's where I think he's coming from. I think there's another thing that he said is 2 lovers ruin love by getting married. That's another Osho quote.
That's correct. He has this pure emphasis on essentially expression of beauty.
Exactly.
And
So the pure love is when you're actually experiencing it with somebody. And then when you get into it in marriage and then you put all these rules and shackles and bounds around it.
Yeah. I think the way I see
It's
it
not as
is
good.
like, there's 2 perspectives, right? It's like marriage for the individual and then marriage and what it does for society. And I think Osho, the way I see it, he's kind of focusing for the individual. So like you said,
Yeah.
for the individual, it can stifle your fluidity and freedom in your relationship, right? Marriage provides structure inherently and rigidity. So in terms of, I think, Osho's views, which is a lot more about self-expression and self-actualization, it can limit that in some ways, reducing the freedom. But I guess some of the other philosophies around marriage is that it's not just about the individual, it's about the society and maintaining social order. So from that perspective, I feel like there is an argument that some level of rigidity is useful.
That's really interesting. On that point, he kind of like akins a bit of what you said, Anuraj, earlier, is this idea that it is essentially a lifelong slavery. But essentially, he says he akins it to the analogy of a camel, which is essentially a beast of burden. And he says that camels don't rebel, the more burden a camel can carry, the more precious he becomes. The same is the situation of a married man, the more burden he carries, the more respectable and honorable he comes in society. So any kind of like chains, like they prevent essentially him from becoming a rebel. But he says that this is only kind of one side of looking at it, right? That if you have essentially any form of courage, any form of intelligence, that burden can essentially become some form of cause of rebellion, which is interesting when you think of the cause of divorce, right? It's just a question of shifting focus. So he says that there is realistically only one way that is acceptable to society, and that's in the form of renouncing life and accepting this kind of form of monkhood, which is, he calls it an escape. And it is a very cowardly escape in that sense.
So he calls monkhood an escape.
Yes, so he does. And he says it's cowardly, but he calls it acceptable and prestigious. But it's essentially the society has this kind of allowance for this individual to search for the truth and to drop all the responsibilities that they have towards society and the things that they need to do to pursue that. And I find that really, really interesting because this concept of tradition is basically recognizing that not just as a man, but just in general, that you have to essentially carry forth responsibility and basically pay that back to the family unit as you grow older in life, because your parents, your family, your friends have contributed to your existence in that front. And he says that basically that's like that it is this form of antagonistic rebellion and revolution. And
Well, but like, don't you think monkhood in itself is not purely a renunciation from everything in society? Monks have responsibility towards the monastery and the people that the monastery serves, but it's not directly, they're not directly responsible for progeny and a family.
look, they
Yeah, can you, I guess it also, I think it depends. Can you have both? Can you be a householder and be married and then fulfill those duties and then go and renounce and be a monk? Like, it doesn't
think
necessarily
so.
have to be one or the other, right?
Yeah.
You can do both. So I'm not sure if, it sounds like kind of, I don't know, maybe I haven't really understood his view fully enough, but it kind of sounds like it's lacking that nuance.
You could, I think, I'm kind of, I don't want to say I lean towards Osho here, but I can see where he's coming from and I can see what he's trying to say.
I think it
here.
depends
'Cause
what your
Osho-
goals are.
Osho also has a different model for society, right? Because the commune that he started was kind of different in its social norms. when
Maybe
it
for
was
our
in India
viewers who
and-
don't know much about his sort of philosophy and his commune, maybe like let's talk about that. So
Yeah.
who was he, and what were his views? Why were they so radical and different? And what was this whole commune? And like tell us about it.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll just riff off the top of my head with what I know about Osho. He was a professor of psychology, I believe, at some university for a really long time. And then after that, he left that and started doing pravachans, which is usually how like gurus become famous over time. They give speeches and talks and people come and listen. They bring together learnings from various different cultures and various different people that have gone by, and they extract some spiritual wisdom from it, and then they formulate it in their own understanding and then retell it. So from what I understand about Osho, he was Nirishwarvadi, which means that he did not believe in an Ishwar, in a deity. I think he was quite inspired by the Buddha, so that is probably why.
Yeah.
He was attempting to create a parallel society. So a lot of the people that came and visited his ashram in India, or the people that were attending his commune in, I think it was what's the state on top of California? Oregon? It was in Oregon.
Oregon?
Yeah.
Mm.
Something like that. I don't know.
Orange County? No.
Yeah, Orange. I don't know.
Why
Like
does
it
that sound
sounds.
familiar?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But yeah, like so they did not follow general societal norms, which is the family unit is the basis, and you have society being structured at like as a conglomeration of various family units.
Orange County is in California.
Orange County is in California.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Where was Osho's commune?
In Orange County.
It was in Orange County?
Orange County.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool.
Because apparently people were known as Orange people, the people that stayed there.
Orange
So,
people, okay.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think I resonate with his sort of view of spirituality being a very individual journey. And it kind of, going back to my point previously, the same as marriage, it's like you can think about it at the individual level or societal level. I think the part religion plays is like social actualization, right? A lot of these like when we think of religion, we think of these institutions that are more like they're for the community level, whereas I think what his focus was more on the individual level, kind of, I think his emphasis on meditation and kind of like the different forms of like dynamic meditation and stuff. Individual sort of that freedom without these rigid social structures to kind of find the self and actualize like what, like if I were to start on a clean slate, then like what is my truth, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like tying back to what we said earlier, like wouldn't marriage then provide some conditions and some responsibilities that inhibit your truth? Because I think what he kind of says is that family kind of preconditions you and inhibits you in some sense, because it essentially says like, these are your prejudices, this is what you way they see the world, and this is what it is. Whereas truth kind of requires you to be open to all frontiers of everything, right?
No, I totally agree. I think it just goes back to my point that we have this obligation almost to ourselves to find that truth, but I still feel like we have some sense of duty to our communities. And to my view, that's like the whole idea of like that karmic debt, you know, that to create us, society kind of gave us stuff, you know, whether it's our parents doing, like creating us, doing work for us, society, like we are not like self-made in any way, right? And so to repay that, that's where I feel like there's this idea of, okay, well, you kind of pay it forward, propagate, pass on your values and learnings to the next generation. It doesn't necessarily have to be through kids, I think, always. It can even just be through like just being a guru to others. But then I think at some point it's about, okay, that blank slate thing of like, okay, then shed everything and then figure that out, right? So it can be later in your life rather than earlier.
But I have a question, like in terms of like exploration, like wouldn't you say that like your responsibility to the society and community is your pursuit of truth? Because like when you think of, say, for example, like everything Osho embodied, right? Whilst he may not have had a responsibility to the family unit in the context that you're describing, do you think that maybe like the insights that he gleaned from his own spiritual individualistic journey kind of provided like that kind of like context to be like his responsibility to the community, because he allowed other people to also kind of like, you know, create that, and he created a little community in that sense that allowed people
I guess
to
maybe as a thought experiment, what do you think would happen if everyone in society had that attitude of, I'm going to discover my own truth and not sort of think about the societal aspect? Would it lead to society as a whole becoming enlightened, or would it lead to just collapse?
I think it would be both, one after the other, because there won't be anyone to carry on society. So there's that other aspect. I think I'm not entirely convinced of this yet, but hear out the argument. The whole concept of spiritual growth has to do with the promise of an absolute truth being realized. And because that absolute truth is in many ways independent of like the physical world, at least that's what always ends up happening, you come to this odd sort of position where in an absolute truth sense, society, the world, you are insignificant, but in a very practical sense it is. But then you have to think about the fact that across the ages, humanity has learnt more and more about itself, but also the physical world. And I think that responsibility that you're talking about is like is a bit of humility. I am not going to figure everything out, and this absolute truth is worth chasing, which is why you should probably do it afterwards. But like, there needs to be someone that carries forward the works of today. Like, you know, like Elon Musk is going to die. Someone's got to go to Mars. Why not? And like, if we're all just chasing absolute truth on Earth, yeah, we probably might not get to Mars. You know, everyone's there, but like, sorry, no. Yeah, everyone gets. No one's gonna get to Mars.
You need people following each path. Is kind of what I feel like. It's like it's just about the balance, and you need the Oshos in the world that are kind of like, screw this, I'm gonna go do my own thing and figure it out. You need the people that are upholding and maintaining the current system. So I think there's definitely merit in it,
pushing things forward.
But I think not for everyone.
I think I agree with both of what you guys have said, but I think what will inevitably happen is people would just fall on the spectrum of scale of how far they pursue it.
Yeah.
And what that means is like, how much are you willing to essentially give up and some people will just still hold on to, not just hold on to that, but they will be like, okay, my responsibility is to this and my belief system is centered around this, so I will still essentially do the things that I was doing anyways to begin with.
Yeah.
So like, obviously I don't think everyone is going to necessarily just be this one global commune of just
Or just like a bunch, like everyone saying Om at the same
exactly,
time.
exactly.
The
Could you,
entire
could
world.
you imagine that?
Like a whole
collectively,
stadium.
14 billion people in the world just said Om. Like at the exact
That'd be
same
crazy.
time. Like, just the sound waves that you...
Yeah.
Like a Mexican wave of
yeah. So I wanted to really tie that back to, I guess, responsibilities when it comes to dating. Like for you guys personally, have you, like when you think about, say, for example, relationships you've
Yep.
been in, or things that you've been with, people you've been with, how do you think, like what does responsibilities in dating look like for you guys?
Damn, that's a pretty loaded question. Responsibilities in dating. So,
From your
who are the stakeholders in dating? I guess.
Do
let's,
like
let's pull out the
a
consulting
racy
101.
matrix of like
Yeah,
responsibility,
yeah.
accountability.
So in the end, we'll draw a Gantt chart of
Yeah.
value. There's like two circles, and then it's like no responsibility. It's gonna be everything for my partner.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's so you're asking more generally, like, what is a relationship of sorts? Like, what?
No, I would say like in the context of like a relationship, what would you like? Because we talked about this idea of like slavery as a burden, and we talked about responsibilities. What would you define your responsibilities in a relationship, and from your perspective in your dating life?
Are we getting specific about what the relationship is?
Let's say
Like a romantic
Is it
relationship.
a romantic relationship?
A romantic
Are
relationship.
you married?
I mean, you're not in this situation, but let's say that like you're from your past experience, and what if you would extrapolate to like long-term relationships? Because
Yep.
essentially long-term
You would
relationships.
you would like negotiate responsibilities.
Yeah,
towards
that's what
each
I
other,
guess I was saying. I
think.
think it's a contract that
Yeah.
you kind of make between the two of you, and I think every relationship is a different contract. Like the same way I think we were talking about romantic, even as friends, there is a social contract and there's responsibilities for here, whether it's kind of like emotional support if someone is going through something, being there for them, trying to sort of help them in their growth, so supporting personal growth, being like physical intimacy. I think that's another sort of duty almost in more like romantic relationships. So there's a bunch, but like the priority of each, or that would depend on each relationship and the stage in the relationship. I think earlier on versus 60 years down, like it will look very different. So
How do you think your view of relationships has kind of changed since from say when you were like 18 to 20 versus like the view that you have on now?
I think it was pretty immature. Like I think when I was young, it was probably very based on media. So like kind of say Friends, you know, the TV show. Like that's what I would view a relationship as. And in that, I guess it's kind of like two people that hang out and they're like just good banter. And then there's like the intimacy side. And those are probably the two main sides they show in those media. But I think the emotional depth, I don't think they kind of really can capture. You know, just that connection. It's something, and I think that's why love is often the focus of all kinds of different art and poetry and stuff. Because it's like you just can't intellectualize it. It's something that you can only feel. So I think for me, my perception of it was based on other people's representation, and then over time it became based on my own feeling of what a relationship and love feels like.
Very interesting. Yourself, Anuraj?
For me, the earlier, when I was younger, I didn't actually have too many expectations with relationships. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong. I didn't know how I should be, what were my responsibilities, how I should act, how to understand behavior. As I grew up, I have gotten better at reading other people. I think my emotional intelligence was just very low when I first like entered this arena. But as I've grown up, I think my emotional intelligence has increased. There's also the side of relationships which I didn't think about when I was younger was obviously the society and family side, long term stuff that people talk about in terms of practical things, but also in terms of shared vision, shared goals. How can you be a team member that uplifts your partner? How can you communicate your vision and goals, and how can your partner, how can you create space for your partner to also play that role for you?
Okay.
Yeah. I guess, I'd like to ask you, Dylan, the same question, but also like not just your responsibilities to your partner, but what do you feel like are their obligations or responsibilities to you? Like, what do you kind of feel like you kind of look for in a relationship in that sense? What do you feel like you want to receive?
Intrinsically? That's a really good question, actually, in terms of what I'd like to receive. So initially, it was very surface-based. I think when I first thought about it, I was like, well, I want someone that looks good on my arm, right? So you're like, oh, I want X, Y, Z, and it's like, it's all based off this idea of what you think you want. And then as kind of like you enter, like, I guess as you go through the course of life and as you find yourself in like really rocky places, there are times that you want to just be able to be with someone and be able to confide with someone and to essentially distract yourself from the reality that kind of exists.
Yeah, the companionship.
Companionship.
Yeah, it's looking for a companion, because I think I've made this mistake before, but expecting your partner to be a certain way versus just experiencing your life with your partner, and then they're not there because they play a very specific role in your life, but they're sort of just there experiencing life with you. And that's that unique formula that you want. Someone who you can like do that with.
That was kind of my realization over time as well. It's like what I see love as now is not liking this idea of someone, or like having this thing of like, I want someone to fit into my life like this.
Yep.
I'm like this and I want them to fit like this, and I will, it's like conditional on them fitting in like that. Love is, I think, more about accepting someone for who they are, and I think the real demonstration of love is that sacrifice, like when that compromise, like that's when, like if you're getting exactly what you want, like I'm getting like, I want a chocolate cake and I get a chocolate cake, then is that really love, or is that just pleasure? Right. But if it's like, okay, I got like a, like a caramel cake, but I still made the effort to like appreciate it and enjoy it for what it is, that's more that love for that dessert.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It goes against Osho there, in the sense that, like, so what you said was love is demonstrated through sacrifice.
Yeah.
And I think Osho's whole perspective was that when you are sacrificing, it's no longer love. It's something else that's keeping you binded together.
That's amazing that you just said that, because as you said that, like, this has just come up, is that love needs two things. It has to be rooted in freedom, and it has to know the art of trust. That's one of his kind of like bite-sized quotes. But essentially, to kind of like add to what you guys are saying, I think what I recognize about love is it's more internal than it is external. So, for example, what I kind of started recognizing is that instead of kind of like being like, oh, like my initial idea of love was this idea of like, oh, like I love songs. I want to like I hear about it in like, Beyonce songs. Or like I used to be a massive like romantic lover boy, So I'd be like
certified lover boy.
Yeah.
That's it.
But essentially, I'd really fall in the idea of love, and I'd be able to kind of really tune into the sweetness of it, which is amazing. But I think over time, I started to get more realistic about it and realize that loving someone it's not about loving someone else or even just accepting someone else. It's about accepting yourself, because they're always going to be the reflection of you. When I stopped thinking about, because every single time that you've had an argument with your partner or anything, it's always two people locking and never being able to find this kind of like middle ground of like what this is. And somewhere deep down inside of you, you're like being like, okay, this is who I am, and I'm not like being able to accept that about myself, and I'm not being able to communicate that kind of part of me, and I get my partner to understand that, to see it from my perspective, and then be like, oh, that's this. So relationships are just this course of like this kind of like butting heads, and then realizing, oh, okay, this is what you were kind of trying to say, like afterwards. But like from the outside, like of course someone who's kind of like just looking at it and being like, wow, you're in like a 10-year relationship, wow, you've been in a marriage for so long, and it's like you kind of don't realize that it's through the process of that you're like, oh, now I understand about myself, because I've actually fought with you to learn that like I don't like that, I like that. Whereas you kind of navigate through life being like, oh, I think I like that, I don't like that. But I think what's really interesting, and especially tying this back to like the youth of today, in terms of like the concept of whether they should get into relationships or not. Like I think that my kind of take on it is,
isn't it inevitable?
Or like the question is maybe when they should get into a
when
relationship.
they should,
I mean, like they can create guidelines for it, but it's like life just plays its hand.
Exactly. Like there isn't really like an intrinsic age and day and time, right? If something finds you, it's why you should never really look for someone.
I mean, it's a question. Do you guys feel like it's something that should just be, it will happen when it happens, or for younger people, like it is something that they should put thought into, of like figuring out, like not planning, but having a rough idea in mind. Like, okay, I want to get, say, married by this age, ideally. So, in dating them for this many years before, and then kind of, okay, ideally want to be seeing someone by this age. Okay, so I'll start putting myself out by this age. And like, I also want to focus on my studies up until this age. Like, you know, like having some sort of high level map like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that in mind, but obviously not with overly attachment to that, because they won't always.
Yeah, exactly. If it doesn't pan out that way, it doesn't mean that like
it's not the end of the world as well. But I think it's also not like a useless exercise.
Because I think, to counter your point, I think I used to be like that, right? I used to be the kind of person that was like, by 25 I want to be married. By this I want to like be really monogamous to this one person. Still about monogamy, but don't get me wrong. But I want to be.
Let's dive in there.
No. I want to be monogamous to one person. I really want to find a job that gives me fulfillment enough so that I'm just like, I can do this for the next 60 years of my life, and then just do that. And like no regard or consequence for any form of daily life. Like I'll have kids, I'll live, and then I'll go about my day. But now I think where I've kind of like seen to what it is, like I was also like, I'm going to be a billionaire by 30. I mean, I'm not 30 yet, so of course it could still happen. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is that life always takes its own individual journey, and I just never really expected that like I'd be actually a lot more richer than I am materially, just because I just decided that's like that I'm going to actually take more of this path of finding and floundering and figuring it out early on, as opposed to kind of like really sticking to, I guess, what I think might be just right, if that makes sense, or what other people think are right, and then just blindly following it and questioning it a little bit, I guess.
I think it's just being conscious of it. Like, I still believe, like, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And it's not to say if you do plan, then you'll succeed as well. Like, the converse is not true. But it's kind of like, even if your things don't go to plan, it's fine. Make a new plan. Like, just keep revisiting it. And it's more like you'll still be walking with direction. And you won't always get to it, but you'll have a direction. But yeah, I think just tying back to the love and marriage topics, because I guess we started this podcast so far by kind of starting with a particular view on marriage from Osho, and then I guess we're kind of exploring, well, what is marriage? Step back, what is relationships? What is love? I think, I mean, I'd be curious to just hear, like, at the highest level, how you guys actually define love. Like how do you know when it is love, you know? Because like I was saying in the start, it's such a difficult thing to intellectualize, and I think for me, I often define it based on symptoms that are kind of like usually around when love is the case. Like the one I mentioned, it's like, you know, for example, accepting someone for who they are and not being conditional on I will love you if X. It's just like I love you for you. The other symptom I feel like I've noticed is like, it's like I want you to be happy, even if it's at the expense of my own happiness sometimes. So, for example, like I will go out of my way to do something that goes against my own objectives, goals, even if it makes you happy. And not to say that it should always be like that sounds toxic if it's like always kind of against me, but like I will kind of, and that's a sacrifices thing, right? Like I will.
Do you think you actively do that though? Like in like a relationship where, even in a relationship, do you think you actively like go out of the way being like, every situation? Because like the way that I mean, my kind of understanding of relationships is twofold, right? It's kind of contradictory, but it's also like duty, but also being selfish.
Yep.
So in the sense that like I'm completely disagreeing with you in the sense that it's like, I know I love you when I do things for you that I would just never like. I would do it and I would just be like, I completely hate the fact that I'm doing it. I'm there, but I'm doing it. Like even though like I'm there for you. It's like the concept of just being present, even if it's not being present, or even acknowledging that presence. Like in that sense. And I think that's what I think like true love is like, it's like, oh, like even if you're like, okay, you need to be there for your partner or something like that, you can just like purely be like, oh, like acknowledging where you are and being like, oh, I'm not present, but I'm going to be present there for you. And on the other hand is like the concept of selfishness, which is like when you do things like sacrifice, not forgetting that you have to love yourself intrinsically, because it always comes back to that. If you forget how to love yourself, no amount of partner love will ever give you anything that you want in life, and you will immediately fall into this pit of like, I'm trying to please them so that I can feel that form of love that I feel for myself. But you'll never get that because you have to love yourself. And if you do not, then your partner, you don't give your partner permission to love themselves as well. Like they want to be able to be like, oh, I can look after I can now fully explore myself because my partner is secure, or my partner loves themselves enough to do the things so that I don't need to just always be like, oh, hey, like I need to do this for you. Like sacrifice then doesn't become more of like this constant, continual game of who needs to sacrifice when, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sort of just happens. I think love, super complicated, but if you had to ask someone, why do you love your child? That's a weird question. And I think that there's a hint there on what love is. I think you just do. You just love them. Like there's no like, oh, because they do this for me, or because they sacrifice.
That's the unconditional aspect.
It's the unconditional aspect. You just do. Like they can do something absolutely crazy. Like, do you still love them?
And we can say the same for our parents. Like
I think boundaries and love can be two different things. So when you're talking about setting expectations and or being selfish, that's a different aspect of it, which is almost independent of love.
Yeah.
Love just is. And then
and that's why I refer to it as like a symptom.
Yeah.
I think like generally these things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
But it's more like a sign that there is love around.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like, because I think that, like you said, love, it's too complicated to put in this box.
One sentence. Like, what do you think love is?
Yeah. It's a feeling, and the part of our brain which I think which processes that feeling is different to the part of the brain that can figure out words.
It. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I liked what you said about like the fact is like, why do I love my child? You know?
Yeah.
A bit different answers for everyone, but I think one kind of realistic answer that just came to my head as you said that was literally because like they're gonna pick up where you stopped. Like when you at some point kind of like were like, okay, I can't like this is my point. Like your child is essentially meant to be the continuation, the extension of you. So they are you. You know, so
I agree, but that also is kind of leaning into like a conditional view of like that they're gonna.
What
it's
if
like
they're not an extension
transactional.
of you?
Yeah, like what if they're not kind of carry forward your legacy? What if they end up being like a criminal and like just like someone who's not adding to society in a meaningful, positive way that you would have wanted to? Would you still love them?
I think to some degree, that's a good question. Would you still?
I think yes, but your rational brain would create boundaries around how much of that love can you express and show.
And as well, like the way that expression is shown, it would be differently. Like for example, completely arbitrary example, but Breaking Bad.
Sure.
Right? If you notice like Jesse in Breaking Bad, he is the prime example of a kid that is basically a screw up or a muck up. But his parents, despite everything, despite all of that, still try to give him as much opportunity and chances. And they love him probably the most comparatively to, say, like, their kid that, like, maybe just kind of, like, did and followed what their parents wanted them to do.
Yeah, so I guess my point is more, I feel like it's the idea of your kid carrying forward your legacy, I think, is independent to loving your kid. I think that I don't necessarily think, I think it can be related, but I don't think the love intrinsically is coming from that.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So I guess at this point we'll probably take a second to take a break here, because I think we've talked about a lot about, like, you know, dating, love, responsibilities, but I'd love to also, like, I think as a collective would love to hear, like, your thoughts, especially like where you're at in life, and what are your thoughts on responsibility?
What do you think love is?
Yeah.
Write us a poem.
What is love?
Baby, don't hurt
Baby,
me.
don't hurt me.
Don't hurt me. No more.
No more.
All right, we'll catch you in the next segment of this episode. See you soon. Cool. All right. Welcome back to the Threefaced episode, where we've touched upon things like responsibilities, dating, marriage, but I think now we'd probably like to delve deep a bit more about kind of like opinions in society and like our takes on them. I think one such thing that, like, the first thing that's kind of come to mind since we last touched off was about the concept of just like grinding, and the concept of like working, essentially building your empire, building your kingdom from the ages of 18 till 30. Let's put 30 as the final, like the time, and then at that point being like, okay, now it's time to date. Now it's time to explore what options are. So for myself personally, I am of the purest idea that this is what one should do. Just because I think that you have way more options than you think you do. And the more you explore your own individuality, the more you...
So it's to say that you should just focus on your career, financial security, passions, building yourself, self-growth and actualization from 18 to 30. And then you're saying, after that, figure out relationships and romantic and stuff like that. And is this take kind of like, would you say the same for men and women? Or do you feel that applies more for men in your eyes?
I could probably only realistically comment from a man's perspective. So I will definitely say from a man's perspective, that's where intrinsically they'll have the most amount of value to give.
Okay, so let me add a little bit more context to this. So this take is, I would say, currently very popular along with like the grind set view. I think when we were around 18, 19, 20, this whole like excessive grind set, side hustle, make money, like material, everything wasn't really a thing as much. And whatever you call it, like post-COVID era, this has just become something that's just taken over social media. And everyone, I don't think this is limited to our generation, but like kids who are like 21, my cousins or younger like friends, they're, you know, influenced by this. Elder generation, my like I guess other people that I know who are in the 10-year mark or 20-year, or even in my parents' generation, they get influenced by all of this as well. And there's a separate concept, which is obviously sexual market value. And it is said that 30 is the age at which, for the first time, a man's SMV raises above a woman's SMV. Because usually, like, as the way it goes, it's like that women get a lot more attention at a younger age than men do in general. And that's why the 20s are all just like, it's like the woman's
playground.
Prime. It's like the playground. And then that sort of shifts at around age 30. And that's interesting because you said that this 18 to 30 range is your grind set era. And then post that is when you like cash in on your
absolutely.
You know, all your sacrifices.
So it's kind of like the same philosophy of like essentially working your life and then being able to enjoy your retirement, right? So the way that I think about it is like, maybe like I want to kind of caveat by saying like I don't really buy into like this new age kind of like grind set like kind of like mentality. I think what I'm talking about is not work from an economic activity perspective, but more from the concept of like actually actively building out your character, because like actually cultivating a personality of who you are and like developing that and retaining your individuality as a person increases your market value as you get older.
Sure.
Because essentially what I've kind of, my perspective of things is that as you get older, society homogenizes you. So you essentially start, your personality, a lot of the things that the thoughts that you have essentially become a lot of the things that the masses think. Not even just the masses, but just what general consensus is. So
But isn't that always the case? Like, you think that as a kid you're taught like what people are taught. You go to school, you just get taught what everyone else in the class is getting taught.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like that all throughout.
I mean, is it more that at certain points you, like when going through more shared life experiences, like wedding, having kids, buying a house, like you're going to become more homogenous in your lifestyle in that sense, as opposed to, say, your 20s when there's much more wider scope of the kind of lifestyles that...
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's kind of like going vertically down versus kind of laterally, right? You can find depth in either regard. Like, I'm sure plenty of married people will be like, oh, I've found so much value in my shared experience with people, like my wife or my husband. In what sense? But I think that personally, like from the perspective of where things are, like if you are, regardless of whatever plane you're in, whether you're in a marriage or anything, you're still competing in a society that exchanges, that is transactional and requires like money as like this kind of like exchange for value, effectively. So your worth to some degree is dependent on how much you're able to create for yourself in the materialistic sense. So you're like, oh, I've created this amount, and like now, like to some degree, the people that like kind of see it will also be able to recognize your own value, regardless of whether you're in a relationship or married or not. My personal take and my thing on this is that every single person, to some degree, should develop their own individuality without kind of like buying into like, oh, this is just popular trend, this is just thought. Retain that consistency of their originality and express it and learn it, and then understand that, and then like at a certain age, once they've been able to actually like use that to then develop like economic means, like for example like this podcast, for example, right? It's a prime example of us exploring our individuality to be able to understand like ourselves, but to also then fundamentally be able to just do more with it, right? Like we're doing this obviously, and like I'm speaking personally as well, is that we're not thinking about it from the money filter right now, but by doing this as an active exercise, we are essentially like long term opening ourselves to more money filter options that do open up, because we've essentially embraced that essence of who we are. And being like, okay, we're going to go down this path irrespective of what it might be. But embracing work as play, and then doing that from your 18s to 30s. And then by the age of 30, being able to connect with other people that have just as interesting lives as you. And then being able to be like, oh, okay, now I can like understand like what I want, and like what like not what a partner feels in my life, but like how like that dimension of my life can now come into play, because I've achieved everything I want. When you're like, I think one thing that we didn't touch upon in the previous segment is that we didn't talk about like we talked about the concept of sacrifice, but I think we talked like with marriage, you compromise a little bit of ambition. And when you compromise ambition, you're really realistically compromising some of your dreams that you want to kind of achieve, right? Because you're like, oh, I can't like this, you can't do this, but like you want to do some of these things by yourself. So I'm of the advocate that, like, for example, if you're like, and this isn't advice, but this is more coming from it's
a perspective.
Like, if you're in a relationship and like you've just broken up, you've been cheated on, you've gone through anything, you're young, the worst thing you can do is just be like, okay, I'm going to revert back to this relationship mentality. Part of the best thing that you could do is literally just be able to encompass yourself into things that you love and enjoy that are not women or love oriented around that. Because naturally, as you start gravitating towards more things like that, other people like women will start to recognize your own value, because you recognize your value. When you recognize your value, there is like, then at that point it doesn't become like, oh, like, where's my partner? I'm 27 and I'm hitting this age. It becomes like, oh, I know who I am. I know what I stand for, and I know like that this person I can appreciate so much more in a relationship, because I've loved myself, they love themselves, we love each other, and we're gonna add value together. That's the next stage for me. That's why I believe in this purist methodology.
Why do you think so many cultures encourage people to get married earlier then? Because cultural wisdom goes against this
I think
current trend of
it
like,
goes back
set
to
yourself up, and like it's not just like, I'm not coming from an Eastern perspective, but across the world, across cultures, if you talk to elders, it's like get married young.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the initial conversation we had about why marriage. And I guess what Dillon's more focusing on is this individual expression and exploration. And I think what those elders and cultures are talking about is societal order and structure. Because I think getting married earlier, people entering into these monogamous relationships early might be better for social order. You know, like less, for example, unwanted pregnancies outside of relationships and stuff like that, which can be a challenge. Like single parenting is a difficult thing. So from a social point of view, I can see why that rigidity is useful. But from, as you said, like individual exploration of the self and truth, that can be a hindrance. And that was Osho's, I think, original thesis to start with, right? I don't know, the whole like sexual market value concept, I'm still not kind of fully sold on it. I think maybe it's just because I associate it with like very like red pill incel communities.
It is a very red pill.
And like
thing.
I think the context it gets brought up in kind of like it often is like it stereotypes a lot of things around
a lot
like
of details around it, right? Like
the value of men is like, okay, you're the provider, and then the females are like the prize. And
I almost feel like the whole space is just surrounding that initial impression. Like in the initial impression, like say, then like when you don't know about somebody, then like your metrics make an impression, right? All of these metrics, like how much you earn or what do you do. But once you get to know them, and once you actually get into a relationship, all that shit is like pointless. It's about your individual dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it talks about these very superficial qualities, which I don't like. If we're talking about like marriage at this deeper level or love, I think those things are irrelevant. Like I think maybe it's more what you're talking about is like what Dillon said. It's more about like maturity to be in a relationship, having kind of confidence from tackling life's challenges.
No, guys. Just another thing. We always have a call from Mama. From Anuraj.
Put her on the podcast.
Could just pick it up.
Yeah, could have just like put the phone down. Hey,
let's
guess we're taking a little break.
So let's talk about responsibilities to family. This is one quiet example where professionalism and telling.
That's fair enough. So that's unconditional love. He loves her despite interrupting podcasts.
Yeah, like the man is mama's boy. What can we say? He only loves his mom and his mother.
There's like resisting to the urge to make a SMV comment about.
So are all red pill people just mama's boy? No, I think one thing that I wanted to kind of raise is I want to kind of take a little bit of a contrarian thing because I agree with you, but I also kind of disagree with you because I think red pill to some degree in like only like from like a idea perspective can actually help a lot of men. Maybe not so much in like the way
I think there's elements of it, but I think it's like a package deal and there's a lot of toxic stuff in that package.
No, absolutely. But I think that there are a lot of disenfranchised men out there that like.
Are we doing the Andrew Tate conversation? No. Is that where this is going?
I got my glasses out. No, I think just like it ties back to the philosophy. Like I know that a lot of the like executions are like really kind of like blatantly sexist, but I think the concept of like getting your bread up, being a productive member of society and doing things that are actually good for you and prioritizing yourself is the best thing you can do for yourself. And even like at the expense of like kind of like, especially if you come from a long-term relationship where you have put so much of your own worth in someone else. Yeah. Like I think that's like such a breath of fresh air when you're going through that stage of being like finding who yourself is again.
No, for sure.
Where the line is where you start kind of like, I think to your point is like almost like being like, oh, okay, like every single woman is nothing but any, like they're not important to me, you know, like purely idea based.
Yeah. It's like, look, I think, to summarize this whole thing, it's like the SMV stuff just like any psychological thing, it's like a model for reference.
Yeah.
It's taken these couple parameters.
Yeah.
Maybe it's taken some data about, you know, they've shown photos, attraction, and it's like, okay, and then it's like, then it gets dangerous when you start generalizing of, okay, yeah, men, like I am going to be at my best at 35, and women, I'm going to be worth intrinsically more than the woman.
Yeah.
And it's like that, no, like that's when it becomes problematic. But to your general sentiment, I think, yes, there's definitely value in, before getting into a relationship, kind of doing that process of figuring out who you are, what is, you know, what are your values and things like that, so that you can get into a relationship and have those boundaries, rather than, I think a lot harder to figure that out in a relationship.
Yeah.
And again, that's what Osho was saying. It's like,
Yeah.
especially when it's like a rigid
like
marriage institution relationship, when it's like a social, it's not just a relationship with you two, it's a relationship with society.
Society as well. Maybe Osho's coming from the perspective of a
grind set.
not a grind set. It's all about grind set. There's a reason he was going around in Rolls Royces and having all these.
Let me tell you about the 7-figure course that he's got. have you guys?
I've heard that if you give Osho your money, he'll set you up for the Australian property markets. So.
Oh, sorry, you're going to say something that Osho.
Maybe Osho has the perspective. He's coming from the perspective of Indian culture, where people do get arranged marriage.
Yeah.
And there is not that much emphasis given on individual growth at all.
Yeah.
And the two sexes are quite segregated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, in our context, where the sex is not really segregated, people like intermingle. There's friendships. There's all kinds of things, like relationships, etc. Like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, like self-growth, a lot of it happens in relationships. A lot of it, like, you get shown your mirror in that relationship, and you get to grow, and you learn a lot of things in terms of like patience and like how to understand somebody, like emotional intelligence. So like it's like you can get some of that. Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I think
these type of things.
Just to play contrarian again, like just to the original thesis of like, grind set till 30 and then figure it out post then. I do think that there is an argument to be made that if you just literally don't focus on dating and that thing, you're gonna be stunted socially. In that like courting aspect.
I think so. Right? So, yeah.
That is a skill in itself, and you kind of need to go through that process to kind of understand it. Sorry?
No, nothing.
Pick up artists.
Yeah, kind of. And I think part of it is also like, yes, there are all the fish in the sea, but that the stocks deplete as you kind of get older, I think. I mean, I haven't kind of been through my 30s to kind of say that with confidence. Maybe like people come out of relationships at some point as well, and there's like there is a restocking. But at least from what I've seen in friend circles, like people start to get more relation, and that's fine. But I think that's a risk that you need to just consider when you kind of just put your head down and grind set.
It's all about scarcity at the end of the day. It's all about scarcity. I think the more, like, what happens is eventually you, like, so as you said, you kind of have like obviously like the prime, which is like, oh, this is like when awesome, everything is kind of like freely available, and you're like, oh my god, I've got everything available. But then as people start to get into relationships, yes, scarcity starts to increase. But then even like scarcity for your own value starts to like increase, because then you're like, I'm the only guy who's got this at this age, at this stage.
That's assuming you got that though.
No,
what if you what if you are like 35 and you haven't like made it as far as you wanted to?
Realistically, if you put your head down and because I mean, let's say hypothetically, you're not entertaining the concept of a long-term relationship. You are essentially you're spending all of your time into something. Like, you have to put it into something. Like, if you're like in like a dead-end job, you don't have responsibilities to anyone. So you're still you might financially be better off. And I'm generalizing here, but what I'm saying here in this same regard is that I still think that like it's kind of like any form of like material good, right? There's a time where there's a value for it and people really want it, but then as soon as it's potentially discontinued, the value of it just goes higher and higher. So yes, like there's a lot of value for like married men in the sense of like, oh, they're not available on the market. But there's also going to be a value for men that just don't like seek the company of like casual women, and also like just are looking for like driven people, or just driven like minded people, and it just doesn't even need to come from this concept of just like, oh, like this grinds it, which is just the infancy of like where you're kind of like going to essentially.
No, I hear what you're saying. I guess I'm pointing at the nuance that,
Yeah.
like, yes, at 30, you could completely have that scenario you played out where you've like made it in, like, established in your career.
Yeah.
You have all the confidence and money and like status, and as a result, you are now like more open and stable to kind of get into that relationship. But again, it could have gone the other way, and like, you're still progressing. And then by that logic, do you wait till you're 40 now? Because that's when you're going to hit that number, then 50. And at what point is it actually that being in a relationship can actually provide you support in helping you obtaining those goals rather than work against you? And I think
there's also a major assumption here that's saying that like if you did get into a relationship, it is a high chance that it's not going to align with your material goals.
Yeah.
And then if it's not aligning with your material goals, then obviously don't be in that relationship. But it's not necessarily
the case.
Like every case.
I think I'm just thinking about it more from the perspective of like, even if like, say for example, you don't get like the wealth that you want, right?
Sure.
You still like explored more of yourself, such that you have more, I would say, from crudely speaking, like value to display as like, this is who I am. Like there are plenty of nomads in the world that have no money to their name, but you could talk to them and you could like just experience that.
Yeah. So is it really then the material success, or like, I guess more the confidence and self, like, knowledge that you have, that's the goal?
Yes, that is that.
And does that have to wait till 30 then?
No, but then like, I think on some level, because it goes back to the concept of responsibility, right? If you're gonna take on a wife and kids and family and stuff, you can't just be someone full of like truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta be able to have that like material foundation as well. It doesn't have to be like Elon Musk, but you just gotta be like, on some level
have some
as in obvious no one finance.
I think we're all agreeing you need some baseline of being able to provide.
Yeah.
But like the question was more, I guess, do you need to be like, like just much
but
further along?
You
and
probably could provide even in that.
What do you reckon Leonardo DiCaprio thinks about this?
Us, the 25-year-olds.
100%. I think Leonardo DiCaprio just he knows. Like he's like, like I feel like he's been burnt to the degree of, he's like, you know what?
I don't know. I think
he's nailed it to a science. He's like, 25 is the age where it's just like cooking a steak. It's ripe. It's like,
just before their brain develops, and then they get the ick.
as soon as they figure out what they're actually
How do we know it's like him leaving the girls at 25 and not the girls leaving him? We never stop to ask. I don't know. I actually think with Leo and a lot of these actors, going for younger women, my theory is more that that's where they are mentally themselves. Just because being like getting rich and famous too early, before you've like figured out those values and purpose and all those things, can actually stunt your getting there. Because then you don't have to struggle and go through that suffering to actually find that truth. And so I think...
And you're saying that like on some level, only monogamy at an early age can give you that?
It could probably give you an insight into... like it will give you the value of that particular truth.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay, so like a varied perspective of Leo. Say he doesn't go for younger girls, but he goes for like, say, like a similar age group.
Sure.
Right? Or maybe like, say, 10 years younger instead of...
Sure, yeah.
Whatever it is, right? But he still breaks up with them every 5 years.
Yeah.
Is it now suddenly okay?
Well, I'm not saying it's okay or not. I'm just more trying to understand why he might be doing that.
Let's pull him
Yeah.
out.
Let's
Hey, Leo,
like, as in, like, it's not just him though. It's like a common trend in that kind of industry, and I just feel like it's a symptom of getting rich too early. It stops your growth. So I think it's not really a counterpoint to this grind set stuff, but it's more like do the grind set, but like step one, figure out that direction, who you are, actualize. Then, to me, I feel like that's when you're almost open to being in a relationship too. I think you can do the getting rich part with a partner. Like that's where I'm coming in. Of like, I think as long as have some baseline, as we were saying, you can't be like completely unable to provide. But I also don't think you need to be at that super rich level, and then it's like, okay, time to get a partner.
I just think tracking back to like the concept of like, say for example, like Leonardo DiCaprio versus say like someone in their 20s, like doing it, two different attention spans and two different people as well. Like young people entering into long-term relationships, doing things with their partner, unless it's very, very clear, like we are almost like business partner kind of like level of transactional, where you are able to like compartmentalize, like we're going to do this together and this is this, and we're going to separate the relationship side of things, versus like being able to just be able to be with them. The one thing that I find is that, like, I think from my own personal experience, is that it's difficult to separate, because you want to dedicate all of your attention and all of the things, all of your time to essentially that relationship. And that's why I think it's not like...
But is it necessary to do that though? I don't like... There's another statistic, I don't know where it's from, I probably just heard it somewhere, but as soon as men get married, they start making a lot more money.
Yeah.
It's like having that partner, having that emotional stability, having that consistency, knowing that like you don't need to spend that extra energy to like, you know, go out in search of a partner and stuff like that. That just creates this like routine that just fuels you.
Yeah, I don't think it is ever really like 100 and 0, right? It's never like 100% on career and 0% relationships, and then I'm going to get into a relationship and then they're my everything, and then like career will just be like going steady state, and not like, I don't think it works like that. I think in reality it's always going to be a balancing act of those two, plus maybe your kids and all your other side passions and fitness, and it's going to be a constant juggle. And I think it's more learning how to do that juggle. And I think you can the thing I think we all agree on though is like juggling is a lot harder. Sorry, figuring out your purpose and that stuff is a lot harder when you're juggling, like, because that stuff just requires a bit of emptiness and just solitude. But then the doing, I don't think necessarily does. I think that when you have that direction and you're just going, it's a bit easier to juggle.
I think you like juggle everything in life generally. Like, I mean, you juggle everything, like your relationships with family, all these things in general. But I think you have to be one-minded about things. Like, I don't think that like you'll be able to like realistically be able to create, like, if your objective is like, I want to create X amount of money and do this, I don't think you'll be able to create it unless you're actually actively devoting most of your time to doing so, and being like, this is what I'm going to do, and doing one thing and being like, this is what I'm going to create. And this is how I'm going to
do you think it's not possible to do that in a relationship where you kind of express that to your partner and be like, these are my goals?
I think it's harder to do.
These are, I think,
as in you can't really, as because you're not emotionally mature to be able to juggle it.
Yes, and because you're not.
That's a different case.
Yeah, so I guess that's what we're all saying is like, it's about learning how to do the balancing. And to be honest, I don't really know myself. I think it's more just you just got to do and like experience it and try and get that right. Because I don't know if there's really a handbook on how to do that. But I don't think it's impossible either. Like, I think you kind of...
There's just countless examples of people with like a fairly well settled financial life and a fairly well settled like family life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like there's no thinking about it. It's like there's so many examples of it.
Yeah. That's what I mean. As in, I don't think it needs to be binary like that.
I think I'm just like kind of like factoring in more of the perspective of like people that are around, like not around this like particular age, but in this age where they're like lost for direction, lost for purpose, and they're kind of like, okay, I want to do things, and I'm like, you should do it, and you should like go for the things that like perhaps maybe seem materialistic to begin with, and be like, oh, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna get this body, I'm gonna look at this, I'm gonna do that. Don't dwell too much on it, but be single-minded about it. Do it, and like don't like. I think one like thing. It's not even advice. It's like, don't chase women. Don't, if you're a man and you're young, don't chase relationships. Don't chase any of this stuff. If it comes to you, let it come to you. But when you are ready, you're ready. Like, you don't need to like be like, oh, I need to be all this. Just do the thing that you need to do for yourself and do it.
From a biological perspective,
Yeah.
like we're just here to like propagate our
Yeah.
genes,
Okay.
right? So
Sure.
if
We
you're
gotta
doing,
do
if you, I mean, let's remove like this.
Is this like a pickup line?
No.
Hey girl,
Hey,
you want to
audio
fulfill that biological purpose?
Hey, could you imagine Anuraj rocks up to like to a bar, he's like, hey, how you doing? How you doing? Just from a biological perspective,
This
we
is a
should-
textbook.
my body,
Me
my
and
body
you-
thinks you have a fantastic immune system.
Me and you, we have a single-minded duty to repopulate the population. So what do you?
I don't
say?
make the rules. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just
From a biological
from a
perspective.
biological perspective.
Tell
if,
us, Saviour.
if all of these like things that you're talking about, like building the body, achieving your goals, it's all in some ways geared towards, well, then eventually I will find somebody, settle down, have kids, or just find. Let's not like
It's
toot
connected.
the hand. Let's not toot the hand of like monogamy so much. Like, let's just say it's all got to do with like
It's
progeny,
connected
right?
to sex.
It's
Right?
Sure.
connected to
Yeah,
sex
yeah.
essentially, right?
Yeah. I agree with that.
So then I think maybe the other argument is that if you do get to this stage
Yep.
where you are this successful person and you are still single, then I think the motivating factor is multiple partners.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does
Right,
multiple partners then? Is it because like you?
Because what else is what else, like, okay, now you're 30, you're awesome, you have a fantastic body, you have so much money. Like, how is that different from, okay, I was 18 and I've been with this one girl now, and at 30 I'm with this one girl now.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and like it's also this thing of like, will you be able to attract, like get into a deeper, better relationship at 30 with all that more money? Because there's also the
True.
risk of like you could be attracting someone because of those superficial
Yep.
level things of they're like, oh, this guy
They
has a
haven't
lot of
been
money.
they haven't been through life with you.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't like you, like, as in they may not have liked you.
They didn't like you at your
18,
lowest, so they don't deserve you at your best.
I also think like what you attract is more of a like a reflection, because tracking back to like this kind of insight, life is like a video game, right? What you attract is basically a reflection of what level you're at. So I feel like if you're being like, oh, I'm attracting this potential type of mate, that says more about you than it does about them. So
True.
I don't know.
But I mean, depends how you define levels, is what I'm saying. Because like how we were talking about in the radio show we just did, there's different types of wealth, and money is just one of them. And I think the people you attract who are just focusing on that one quality, I don't think is like necessarily the highest level. But I think ideally you want to attract people for all the other qualities that you have, and they also have these other great qualities, not just money and material success. So I guess that's my just little caveat on all of this. I think it's like, yes, find your purpose, grind, set, hustle, and get into a deep, meaningful relationship. But it's like, I just think there's a lot of nuance to all of this. And I think a lot of the advice being given to people on Reels and the youth right now is just too one-dimensional and is like painting a false narrative.
True.
Based on just like this romanticized, red pill-y kind of
Yes.
concept.
That's a really good takeaway, because at the end of the day, a lot of the learnings of life you can't just learn on a figure course, so like a course that you just read, or that you
But with that in mind, we have a 6-week course.
So,
Comment success in the comments too.
So this is the part where we say that we're unlike any other course that you've ever done before, because we actually have the formula down pat and guaranteed
figured it out.
success.
Guaranteed success. You want to make money? Call us. You
You
want
want
you want
women,
you
you
want
got-
girls? Call us.
We're doing the course ourselves.
Inter? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So, but I think what we're trying to say here is like use some form of common sense, but also keep navigating terrains and be fearless. Like I think
No, like, why are we giving advice?
we're not.
Yeah, you're
I
going
just-
you're going
I
back into the
understand.
Reels
Okay,
territory.
Sorry.
You became the
it's
very
so
evil.
I understand.
Sorry.
I understand
Yeah,
the urge
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
I
yeah.
understand the urge as well, because it's constantly like when you're just scrolling.
Yeah.
Every day, like, you gotta do this. Like, do this.
Yeah.
Bro.
Maybe we should do like ironic, because I've started
Ironic
seeing some
advice.
like ironic
Oh, I
advice
love that.
podcasts
Yeah.
where they're like, like to
Yeah.
I look for a business partner. It's like, if you can't get away with financial fraud, how can I trust you? Like, or something like that.
Imagine, like, let's do that for one episode.
Yeah, it's just like complete satire.
Yeah.
I think maybe just touching on the themes we talked about today then. So we started with this concept of what is marriage and love.
I think we had a very wholesome start.
Yeah.
Like, what is love? And
Yeah.
like, that was good, because that's closer, I feel like, to the heart.
Yeah.
And the other things are a lot more like,
Close
look
to
at me, you know, like they're.
No, I think it's useful to, because there's interaction between all of these, right?
Yeah.
But I think my takeaway from all of this, and I'd like to hear yours as well, but it was this duality that we talked about of the self and the society. We talked about that in the context of, you know, love and kind of institutionalized marriage, and how I think love is more that individual relationship with you and the person, and marriage is more that thing of you, person, and society, and that creating that social order. And then we took that a step further, bringing in your career and kind of your financial prosperity, right? Because even in that, there's that duality of, okay, well, I got to figure out the self, right? I got to figure out my career goals and just figure out my purpose. But then the society again of, I got to think externally and, okay, well, who am I going to do this with? How can I create that partnership and do life with someone else? So it's again looking at self and then versus external.
Yeah.
And I think my takeaway from all of this is I think the likes of Osho or the red pill people will tell you that it's this one way or the other. I feel like it's kind of the balance that we just have to constantly try and strike between all of these. I don't think there is if someone gives you a silver bullet answer on Reels, probably don't listen to them, or maybe that worked for them. Except for us, if we say it, that's true. But it's like, find your own silver bullet that applies to you, rather than someone else's truth.
Yeah.
So just like every other podcast, we're right and everyone else is wrong.
Yeah. You don't need to listen to any other podcast except for ours, because we just have facts. We spit facts. I think to add to your point, to what you kind of said, I think a topic that we kind of touched upon was like love, marriage, and we also talked about kind of like the concept of like doing things versus settling for things, like the idea of like being one-dimensional versus three-dimensional, right? Of course, every topic has its kind of like nuances, but at the end of the day, there's a time to be one-dimensional and there's a time to be three-dimensional. I think at the end of the day, we don't want to be like, do this all the time, become this and become this caricature of you are. You're a human being. You should be that person and be that nuanced, sensitive individual that you are, right? But at the end of the day, understand inextricably what situation you're at, where you're kind of going and what you want to do, and like navigate through that and navigate through who you are and what you want to be. Understand love for what it is and go through the journey, enjoy your own journey with love, and don't like, listen to what others say, but have an understanding of it for yourself, because you're at a different stage of life to it. But if you're young or if you're doing it, just go for whatever makes you, I guess, happy. Go for whatever makes you feel less. Like, the world needs more of that. The world needs you to just inextricably just be yourself and show more of that without the concept of vulnerability. That's the beauty of youth. That's the beauty of love.
Nice.
What do you think, Anuraj?
My biggest takeaway from today was that you need to always be centered in who you are, and that requires a lot of self-exploration. And maybe that does require a little bit of silence and a little bit of time away from other people, including intimate relationships. However, I do believe, and I think we did strike a chord on that I think the fullest lives are when you are able to sort of, you know, start your day with someone you love, go out and do the work that you love, and like give to the community, and spend time with your friends, right? Other relationships, spend time with your parents, your mom, your dad, and then you sort of, and maybe you even create that little time for yourself in the day,
Self-love.
and then you go back to the person that you love at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that cycle of a full life is something that, I thought I was like sort of inspired by in today's conversation. I think that was like the best sort of section, in the sense that like, you want all these things, but like think back at the times when you've had the most fun. It's when it's connection.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And
Thinking
it's not when you're like just trying to I'll show them, or like those are all negative energies, and like sure they propel you, but it's just not sustainable personally.
Yeah, totally. I think keep up the hustle and grind set, but just remember that, as we kind of talked about, money is not the only form of wealth and material success, but love and connections and emotional, intimacy and all of that, that's a form of wealth as well. So hustle on that front as well. And I think as you just said, like I was just kind of reflecting on this podcast, like stepping back, like this is a form of us figuring out, we're doing our self-actualization, but we're doing that in a group, right? I think like if we can do that here, why can't you do that in a relationship as well?
Exactly.
Right? Like yes, you need silence, but I think if you're aligned with the right energy, with the right partner, I think you can explore those truths and figure it out with them as well.
For sure.
Yeah. So on that note, I think we'll probably wrap today's episode up. I think it was a really insightful episode. We touched upon a lot of points. But if you guys don't have anything else to add, I think we could probably just end it on that note.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you got
Thanks
something out of it as well. Tell us what you got out of it. What was your takeaway?
Yeah.
What do you think about love, marriage?
What do you think about Leonardo DiCaprio?
Facts. What do you think about his girlfriends?
And are they breaking up with him or all the way around?
Or is Leo calling quits?
Yeah. Where are the 25-year-olds at? Okay.